Let me take you back to a time when the height of forensic technology was, does this guy look suspicious? I'm talking about an era where they'd hang the wrong guy, find the real killer a week later, and just shrug and go, well, we already used the rope. Today, we're diving into how criminals actually got caught before DNA, fingerprints, and basic logic. Spoiler alert, mostly luck, and sometimes they just didn't get caught. The just guess era. The methodology. For most of human history, criminal investigation was what we in the business call vibes-based law enforcement. Someone got murdered. Well, who looks shifty? Who do we not like? Who's poor? Great. Arrest that guy. Case closed. Justice served. Everyone go home. I'm not even exaggerating. In medieval times, through the early 1800s, the primary method of solving crimes was literally just asking the community, who do you think did it? And then acting on gossip like it was peer-reviewed evidence. There was this beautiful system called hue and cry, where if you witnessed a crime, you'd scream. And everyone in the village would chase whoever you pointed at. No questions asked, no verification, just mob justice with extra steps. It was like Twitter, but with pitchforks, the eyewitness problem. Now you might be thinking, surely eyewitnesses helped, right? Oh, you sweet summer child. Eyewitness testimony in the 1800s was treated like gospel. If someone said, I saw John do it, that was basically a conviction. Never mind that it was dark, or they were drunk, or they just had a fight with John last week about a pig. Fun fact. Studies show that eyewitness testimony is wrong about 30% of the time. But back then, they were batting that average proudly because they literally had nothing else. There's this case from 1896 where a guy named Adolf Beck was convicted of fraud because multiple women identified him as the con man who'd robbed them. He went to prison twice for crimes committed by a completely different guy who just vaguely looked like him. They finally figured it out when the real criminal got caught for something else and was like, oh yeah, I also did those other crimes. And the authorities were like, huh, whoops. Adolf Beck's response, probably not printable. Torture, the original interrogation technique. But here's where it gets really medieval, literally. If they couldn't figure out who did it through gossip and vibes, they'd just torture suspects until someone confessed. I know, shocking. A system designed to make people say whatever you want them to say wasn't super reliable. The logic was flawless, though. If you're innocent, God will protect you from the pain. And if you confessed under torture, clearly guilty. And if you died during torture without confessing, also guilty. The system had no flaws. None whatsoever. This went on well into the 1800s in some places. We like to think we evolved quickly, but humans really took their time on the whole maybe don't torture people revelation. The Bow Street Runners. The first detectives, sort of. Okay, so by the mid-1700s, London had a bit of a crime problem. By which I mean it was a lawless hellscape where you could get robbed in broad daylight. And the authorities would be like, did you try not getting robbed? Enter Henry Fielding, novelist and magistrate, who in 1749 created the Bow Street Runners, the first professional police detectives in history. And by professional, I mean they were literally just guys who got paid to chase criminals instead of doing it for free. Revolutionary. These guys would investigate crimes, track suspects, and actually try to solve cases using gasp evidence and logic. Wild concept. But here's the thing. There were like 8 of them for all of London, which in the 1700s had over 500,000 people. So yeah, crime solving was still mostly hope you get lucky and catch someone in the act. The thief-taker problem. Before the runners, London had thief-takers. Basically bounty hunters who'd catch criminals for reward money. Sounds good, right? Free market justice. Except it created this beautiful perverse incentive where thief-takers would literally encourage crime so they could catch criminals and collect rewards. Some even ran criminal gangs themselves, then turned in their own guise for the bounty. The most famous was Jonathan Wild, who ran the London underworld while simultaneously working as the city's most celebrated crime fighter. He'd steal your stuff, then find it for you for a fee. He got away with it for years until someone finally went, wait, isn't it weird that he solves every crime because he's literally committing them? They hanged him in 1725 in front of a crowd that alternately cheered and booed because even they were confused about whether he was a hero or villain. Honestly, same. The birth of actual detective work. Eugène François Vidocq, criminal turned crime fighter. Let's talk about my favorite problematic icon. Eugène François Vidocq. This guy was a French criminal, convicted forger and prison escapee, who in 1811 made a deal with police. "Hey, let me out and I'll catch criminals for you." And they said yes. Because apparently France looked at the thief-taker disaster in London and went, "Let's try that, but French." But here's the twist. Vidocq was actually good at it. He created the first plainclothes detective unit. He pioneered undercover work. He kept records of criminals' appearances and methods. He literally invented the mugshot. This man went from "how do I escape prison" to "how do we make a database of criminal faces?" And honestly, that's personal growth. He solved cases using actual investigation, interviewing witnesses, following suspects, examining crime scenes. Revolutionary stuff for 1811. The downside? He hired ex-criminals as detectives because who better to catch a thief? Which worked great until those detectives also started committing crimes. Shocking development. No one saw it coming. The Bertillon system, measurements, and hubris. Fast forward to 1879. A Parisian police clerk named Alphonse Bertillon had an idea. What if we measured criminals? Not like judged them. Literally measured them. Height, arm span, head size, foot length, ear length. If it could be measured, Bertillon measured it. His theory? No two people have the exact same measurements. So if we measure every criminal, we can identify repeat offenders. And it kind of worked for a while. They called it anthropometry, which is just a fancy way of saying guy with a ruler. The problem? It required incredibly precise measurements and training, and criminals not growing, or gaining weight, or wearing different shoes. Also, and this is important, it required the police to actually measure people correctly, which, shockingly, they often didn't. There's this famous case where they almost convicted the wrong guy because two people had similar measurements. They were about to send him to prison when someone noticed one had already been executed. Whoops! But Bertillon was so confident in his system, he once testified in court that the odds of two people having the same measurements were 286 million to 1. Buddy, there are 8 billion people on Earth. That math ain't mathing. The system fell apart completely when they found two different people, Will West and William West, in the same prison, who had nearly identical measurements and looked similar. Bertillon's system, debunked by two guys named William. That's how you know it's bad science. Fingerprints, the game changer. Finally, something that works. While Bertillon was out here measuring people's earlobes, other folks were looking at fingerprints. Several people contributed to fingerprint science. But let's talk about Francis Galton, who systematically studied fingerprints in the 1890s and proved they were unique and did not change over time. The police were skeptical. "You are telling me these tiny lines on people's fingers are more reliable than measuring their entire head? Sounds fake." But then in 1892, a murder happened in Argentina that changed everything. A woman's 2 children were killed. She blamed a neighbor. The neighbor said he didn't do it. Standard crime stuff. But an investigator named Juan Vucetich found a bloody fingerprint on a door, and it matched the mother. She confessed. Case solved. And suddenly everyone was like, wait, this fingerprint thing might be legit. Scotland Yard gets on board. By 1901, Scotland Yard established the first fingerprint bureau. They started collecting prints from criminals, creating a database, and actually solving crimes with them. The first murder solved by fingerprints in Britain was in 1905. A guy named Alfred Stratton and his brother broke into a shop, killed the owner, and left a thumbprint on a cash box. The defense lawyer literally argued in court that fingerprints weren't real evidence. "This is pseudoscience. You can't prove that print came from my client." The jury disagreed. The Stratton brothers were hanged. And thus began the era of criminals wearing gloves. Evolution in action. But even with fingerprints proven to work, some police departments held onto Bertillon's system for years. The Paris police didn't fully switch to fingerprints until the 1920s, 20 years after it was proven better. Why? Because Alphonse Bertillon was still alive and working there, and apparently had the ego of a man who'd measured 10,000 heads and refused to admit it was pointless. He died in 1914, probably still muttering about arm spans. Blood typing and early forensics. Finally, science gets involved. So by the early 1900s, we're starting to see actual forensic science emerge. Karl Landsteiner discovered blood types in 1900. Revolutionary for medicine. Pretty useful for crime solving too. Now, when someone found blood at a crime scene, they could at least narrow down whether it matched the victim or suspect. Progress. The catch. This only eliminates suspects with different blood types, and there are only 4 main blood types. so it's not exactly a smoking gun. But hey, it's better than, does this blood look suspicious to you? Luminol, making blood glow. In 1937, a German forensic scientist named Walter Specht discovered that a chemical called luminol would react with blood and glow blue in the dark. This meant that even if someone cleaned up a crime scene, investigators could spray luminol and see where blood had been. Criminals everywhere. Are you kidding me? The only problem. Luminol also reacts with bleach, rust, and certain vegetables. So you'd spray it at a crime scene and everything would light up like a rave, and you'd have no idea if it was blood or someone's aggressive cleaning habits. But it was still better than nothing. Which was the bar for most of forensic science at this point? Ballistics, matching bullets to guns. Around the same time, people figured out that bullets have unique markings from the gun that fired them. Every gun barrel has microscopic imperfections that leave marks on bullets. So if you find a bullet and a gun, you can match them. This sounds obvious now, but in 1900, people were like, wait, you're telling me bullets have fingerprints? The first murder case solved by ballistic evidence was in 1902. They matched the bullets in the victim to the suspect's gun. The suspect's defense: lots of people have guns. The prosecution: yes, but their guns didn't shoot this specific bullet. Convicted. The stuff they still got wrong. Lie detectors. Science fiction. Pretending to be science. In 1921, someone invented the polygraph, aka the lie detector. It measures heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and sweating. The theory: lying makes you nervous. Nervousness causes physical changes, therefore we can detect lies. The reality: being accused of a crime also makes you nervous, as does being hooked up to a machine while police interrogate you. So the polygraph basically just measures, are you uncomfortable right now? Which, in a police interrogation room, the answer is always yes. They're not admissible in most courts today because, shocking, they don't work. But that didn't stop police from using them for decades to intimidate suspects into confessing. The machine says you're lying. The machine is measuring my anxiety about being arrested, Kevin. Bite mark analysis. Confident and wrong. For decades, forensic experts would testify in court that bite marks were as unique as fingerprints and could definitively match a suspect to a crime. Spoiler, they were making it up. Studies have since shown that bite mark analysis is about as reliable as astrology. Multiple experts will look at the same bite mark and identify different people. But this pseudoscience sent people to prison, some to death row. One guy, Ray Crone, spent 10 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit because a bite mark expert said the marks on the victim matched his teeth. DNA evidence eventually proved he was innocent. The bite mark expert's response was probably, well, in my professional opinion, no. Shh. Stop having opinions. Hair analysis. Also garbage. The FBI admitted in 2015 that their hair analysis unit had given flawed testimony in over 95% of cases over a 20-year period. Let me repeat that. 95% of cases. They were wrong almost all the time, but they testified with absolute certainty. This hair definitely came from the defendant. It didn't. At least 35 people were sentenced to death based partially on this flawed evidence. So yeah, the good old days of crime solving? Maybe not so good. So what did we learn today? Well, for most of history, criminals were caught through luck, gossip, vibes, torture, yikes, pseudoscience presented as fact, and occasionally actual detective work. The justice system has always been confident. It just hasn't always been correct. We like to think we've evolved. We have DNA now, digital forensics, surveillance cameras everywhere. We're so much better at this. And we are. Definitely, probably. But let's not forget that in 50 years, people will look back at our crime-solving methods and laugh at what we got wrong. They convicted people based on what? Facial recognition software? And they thought it was accurate, even though it was literally just pattern-matching photos. Yeah, we're still figuring it out. The real lesson. The truth is, humans have always been overconfident in their ability to determine guilt. Whether it's measuring skulls or analyzing bite marks or just pointing at someone and saying, he looks guilty. We've always wanted certainty in an uncertain world. And we've always been willing to believe confident experts, even when the experts are just making it up as they go. So next time you watch a crime show where they solve a murder in 40 minutes with a fiber sample, just remember, it took us until the 1900s to figure out that fingerprints were useful, and we still haven't figured out how to stop convicting innocent people. But hey, at least we stopped the torture thing. Mostly. In most places. Progress. If you enjoyed this journey through humanity's greatest well, we tried moments, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with the worst crime-solving method you've heard of, or tell me which pseudoscience you think we're still using today. I'll wait. And remember, if you're planning a crime, maybe don't. But if you do, at least wear gloves. We figured out fingerprints 120 years ago. I'm your name, reminding you that justice is blind. And apparently, for most of history, also deaf, dumb, and really bad at pattern recognition. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe don't get arrested. See you next time.